JPEGMAFIA. He just came out with a brand new album titled Experimental Rap. Can I get a sense in the chat of what people thought about experimental rap? I did my review of the album. I gave it a 6 out of 10. I thought there were some great highlights on it. I was a little underwhelmed overall, though, I will say. And there were a lot of tracks that, in my opinion, didn't really meet the moment, were not that interesting. Disappointing, empty maximalism. I hated experimental rap. I think All My Heroes Are Cornballs was his peak. Cornballs is certainly a better record in my view, for sure. Even LP, even his last album. The GYBB intro was funny. He was fucking unhinged as hell for that intro, honestly. My review is that it's not good, but or bad, but it lacks the kind of well thought written most audiences bop to. Okay, so it seems like chat is also a little underwhelmed by the project. Peggy, being the artist he is, who is pretty active on the internet, some might even accuse him of being terminally online in some cases. In fact, I think to a degree he would even admit this. I remember like that Danny Brown podcast or sort of like show episode that they did where they talked about how he's actually more online than Danny is, even though many people might presume the opposite, if I remember that conversation correctly. So again, Peggy has been seeing the reception, the lukewarm, the negative reception behind the record. So he's taken to social media to do some posts and essentially react to people's thoughts and criticisms of the album. So I thought it would be interesting to kind of like go over his thoughts here. I do think it is always cool and intriguing to see artists try to dissect the reception of their work. Sometimes I do think it goes over well, or can, create an interesting discourse. I think Charlie is certainly an example of an artist who has done that in recent years with like some of her Substack posts and kind of like, going into the meta of her fame and the reception of her work and so on and so forth. And then conversely, you have examples like Fake Mink, who took to Twitter to do almost like this AI, AI chatbot essay of, you guys don't get my music because it's too ahead of the curve for you, whatever the hell that was. So let's look at, this handful of tweets, these paragraphs really, which have been sort of put together in reaction to the reception for this record, and see what Peggy has to say here. People can say whatever they feel about me, but at the end of the day, remember, most of these people listen to pedophiles and abusers, and that's perfectly fine to them. But they draw the line when a rapper they already don't like is mean on the internet. You can say a lot about me, but you can't say I hit women, and you can't say I touched kids. Sorry. So go live y'all truth and keep bumping whatever weirdo you like. Okay. Off to a bad start. I would like to think, or at least my assessment of a lot of the negative reception around JPEGMAFIA in the lead up to this record mostly kind of came off of, the comments and the back and forth and the beef that he had with like Earl and going back further than that, like Freddie Gibbs, like really sort of like this friendly fire among listeners and artists who are in like the underground scene. Again, I think a lot of the negativity is just like coming from online rap fans. Maybe you could say this is the case if, I don't know, he was beefing with like Cardi's audience, because Cardi notably has been accused credibly multiple times of like, putting his hands on women, so on and so forth. But I don't think Cardi fans are popping in to listen to the Peggy record. Maybe I'm wrong. I know, Nine Vicious over here probably heard the Peggy record and, listens to some weird underground guys, who do have some weird shit going on. Genuinely, not to single you out, man. I'm sorry, but like some of those underground dudes these days are fucking weird. I feel like a lot of the people who are angry at Peggy over recent statements and are underwhelmed by this album are people who have been listening to you up until this point. JPEGMAFIA probably shares a lot of crossover audience with Ye, and Ye has some very credible allegations right now when it comes to abuse that he is in the midst of. So again, I'm just struggling to see and figure out who the hell the target audience is here. And honestly, at the end of the day, like, this has nothing to do with the enjoyment of the music. This has nothing to do with the enjoyment or the quality of the music. Like, should we care about, abusers, and should we care about, creeps operating in the music industry and abusing their platforms as a means of like hurting and harming and taking advantage of others? Yes, we absolutely should. We should care about that. That is an important thing in this era that a lot of people are kind of quick to say is like, oh, that woke shit is over. I think it's something that not enough people talk enough about, frankly. I feel like it's not enough of a big deal to people sometimes. Bringing it up and using it in this way just feels like a diversion from what could be some legitimate criticisms about the work on the album, about the quality of the record. It just kind of feels like from the outset, he's like, well, you shouldn't take seriously anybody who doesn't like my album or just thinks it's okay because they love abusers anyway. And I don't think that's true of everybody. I don't think that's true of everybody who just thinks the album is okay. MJ just had a movie, and true, a lot of people, like MJ's music. I like MJ's music. However, with that being said, I feel like we can also walk and chew gum at the same time. Like, you can hear and you can accept the reality of the popularity and influence of MJ's music, but then also simultaneously like acknowledge like he was very credibly accused of some pretty terrible things, and stuff that doesn't take away necessarily from his talents as a musician, but certainly his quality as a person. So, again, I feel like there's like a certain level of nuance here in this conversation that Peggy is like trying to pull out of it entirely, as a means of just kind of, putting off any criticism that people might have of this record. I love letting people say what they feel, whether it's right or wrong, hate or love. I enjoy the engagement because it's more honest than liking someone just because somebody else told you to. I want you to like me because you like me. I'm not here to make you feel comfortable. I'm here to break shit up. I didn't send this album to anybody beforehand on purpose because I knew it would make them mad and keep them from being unbiased. I wanted people to see how the professional world, with only a few exceptions, can't separate the art from the artist. They're not mature enough to. So I gave sensitive industry people a personality to hate because that's what they wanted to do to me all along. Anyway, it makes them feel better about themselves. Thank you to my haters. You'll be here no matter what because you are lame. And thank you to my fans. I promise I will never, ever do the same thing twice, no matter what. That's a promise. A little confused as to how to take this. I mean, maybe let's start backwards. I feel like we could maybe take this final statement here to say, possibly, that if you are a Peggy fan and you have enjoyed his music up until this point, whatever sort of like performance or concept or put on we were subjected to here, where he was trying to get a rise out of people, whatever that was, whatever the intention was, whatever the plan was there, that the next album cycle, he's not going to do it again. And he just did this to sort of test the waters and see if he could have the desired result and outcome, which for sure, one could argue is like maybe just cope. Like, oh, you guys didn't like the album. Well, that's because I didn't want you to like the album and I did stuff that would make you dislike me before the record dropped. And look, as silly as a statement that is on some level, I mean, even in my review of the record and my reaction to, the Pigs and Planes interview that he did, Pigeons and Planes interview that he did, I did sort of like acknowledge like this does feel a little bit like a heel turn. It does feel like kayfabe. It does feel like he's kind of playing certain elements of his personality or what people expect of him up as a means of getting a rise out of people. So, I mean, I do think there was intention there. Was it good intention? Was it smart intention? Was it the best for his career or public image? Like, I think that could be debated. Personally, I feel like no. But clearly, I do think he was going for that on some level. And he does love wrestling. It is true. So with that being said, so I gave sensitive industry people a personality to hate because that's what they wanted to do to me all along. Anyway, it makes them feel better about themselves. I mean, I could agree with this statement. I do think on some level that is an accurate assessment of some people in the music industry. But I guess, like, why give them that? if you know that at the end of the day, like, creating a personality and a series of statements that give them something to hate, and you're not getting anything out of it outside of people broadly liking you less, and you're just confirming the biases and the hatred of these figures without there being some kind of like drawback or punishment or embarrassing moment for them to suffer through as a result of sort of like eagerly waiting for that moment to hate you. That just seems like a bad trade-off to me. That just sort of seems like you're giving them what they want and you're not getting anything in return. So I'm just a little kind of confused on that. I can appreciate, and I've done my share of trolls and silly, presentations and comments, and some have gone well, some haven't. I get it. I get the desire sometimes to get a rise out of the people watching you by being silly or over the top. It's part of what's fun it's part of the fun of being an entertainer, or somebody who has a lot of eyes on them in whatever capacity that is. But like, I don't really, again, see this particularly as like a great trade-off. I don't know if this was like a great social experiment. I wanted people to see how the professional world, with only a few exceptions, can't separate the art from the artist. They're not mature enough to. Again, I did roughly make the same assessment that maybe there were a lot of people who were into Peggy's music based on vibes, or into some of the underground artists that they like based on vibes, and seeing them sort of like not get along or butt heads or beef in any way is going to cause some people to sort of like, pick someone to side with and avoid the other artist as a result of that. Like, personally, at the end of the day, when I'm making an artistic assessment of how much I like an Earl album or how much I like a Peggy album, do I really, 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 truly give a fuck about how much these guys dislike each other? Or if, Earl, hours before releasing an album, like posts straight to Instagram, like, fuck JPEGMAFIA, he's a fucking loser. And then, the album's out like immediately after. And am I putting that in my review in a way to where I'm like, well, I would have liked this song a whole lot more, but Earl says Peggy sucks. So, no, I don't give a fuck. That's so minor. That's such a minor thing. I mean, are there things or public behaviors that I probably would take into account, prior to the release of an album in my assessment of it? Sure, but it would have to be pretty big, pretty significant, much more significant than two underground rappers beefing. Certainly I've had the ability to continue enjoying projects between Peggy and Armand Hammer, even though they had a thing going for a second. So, I mean, even though to me that's pretty minuscule, I know to some people that's not. I know to some people that is a big deal, and that is a big thing. And there are a lot of people who love Earl's music because they identify with it deeply, and it's very emotionally significant to them. And seeing somebody go at Earl is like, on some level, having somebody go at them. It's like, people take that shit kind of personally sometimes when it comes to their, favorite artists. So, I do get that. And I do think that behavior is kind of lame, but I don't know if Peggy did the best job of like illustrating the ridiculousness of that behavior, at least not without sort of like taking a hit to his own career, which I feel like was kind of like unnecessary. I feel like there could have possibly been other ways of going about this social experiment, if that's in fact what this was, and he's not just like kind of trying to portray it as that after the fact. I feel like there were probably other ways of going about this social experiment without turning quite as many people against you. I don't know. I mean, I feel like when it comes to separating the art from the artist and why people ride for you, even as you continue to do and say things that like destroy your career and destroy your reputation, I don't know if we're going to see a bigger sort of like public social experiment of that on a grander level than we did with Ye over the past 2 years. And I feel like with the recent apologies, like that experiment is still kind of like, that simulation is still very much running, we're kind of waiting to see what the final results of it are going to be. There's not really anything Peggy could do or say that would sort of like exemplify or showcase this kind of phenomenon on that scale. I feel like if that's kind of a a social phenomenon that you're really truly interested, you really only need to sit back and watch whatever is going on with Kanye, you know, and just sort of like slowly observe how that is continuing. No need to come up with like a smaller version of that on your own by hating on one of your contemporaries for no reason whatsoever. I'm not here to make you feel comfortable. I'm here to break shit up. I don't know if this album made a lot of his hardcore fans who have been listening to him since the days of Veteran, like, uncomfortable. Frankly, in my view, I was not really discomforted, even by the Charlie Kirk stuff. You know, to me, it felt almost like kind of par of the course in a way. I don't know. This album is a celebration of all my influences brought together into one project. It goes from the music of my childhood to the music of now, creating something derivative in a new way. Experimental rap is about taking what's familiar and presenting it in an unfamiliar form. It's about placing strings on top of harsh noise, mixing warm synths with digitized distortion. You've had a cheeseburger before, but not like this. Oh God, don't say that. Not in the era of burger music. You don't want to be comparing your music to a burger in the era of burger music. Now, see, there's experimental rap and then there's experimental hip hop. Two very different things. There's always been a debate and a discussion within hip hop circles about what is rap versus what is hip hop, with obviously the term hip hop being portrayed as like, you know, more authentic, less commercial, like the real deal, the side of the genre that's actually in touch with its roots. But what does that side by side mean when you're putting experimental in front of both of them? I don't get the delineation there. I don't get the point that he's making, especially since like these types of experimentations that he is talking about are just like, you know, some pretty basic alternative ways of contrasting different sounds. Like certainly nothing that's brand new when you're looking at even the earliest days of industrial hip hop. That's not to say that like music that does this can't be good or that there aren't good tracks on the JPEGMAFIA album that do this. I love War Over Land. I think that's an amazing track. I think that's a fantastic track. But I don't know, that and that alone, I just don't see as experimental. Like that, to me, that's like, you know, a pretty obvious combination of things. For somebody, especially for a producer of Peggy's experience, who has made some legitimately experimental music in the past. I feel like that's like a pretty basic idea for a producer of his experience, honestly. And again, not to say that something basic or simple or familiar is bad. That I'm not saying that. It just doesn't quite feel maybe experimental or as groundbreaking as, you know, it's maybe being portrayed to be with the title, though, with this explanation. It seems almost like, you know, the point is to not actually be quite as adventurous as you might presume from the outset, because he's talking about just like, hey, I'm taking these ingredients I already know with the burger, and how can I sort of combine them in a different way or combine them in a somewhat unlikely way? I think he's just deep in his feelings because this epically titled album didn't get the reception he really wanted. Maybe, possibly. It's very weird because it feels like, you know, part of the concept and the rollout here was to do an album cycle where he did something to make people hate the album before it actually got released. Do I think there's truth to the argument that like his statement and his statements and behaviors and sort of jabs prior to the album's release probably made a lot of people sour on this record before it came out for everyone to hear? Yeah, you know, I think there's probably like, you know, some truth to that. But the farther that we get out from this album's release, the more of sort of like a bit of a separation I see between the predictable hive mind discourse and comments that we're seeing from the types of people who will pop underneath an Instagram post or pop underneath a tweet to be like, oh, Peggy is so corny. Blah, 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 blah. And, you know, the more sort of like multi-paragraph length breakdowns that we've been seeing longtime fans who actually have context for his discography, who have been sort of like, you know, unraveling the record and just kind of being like, I think it's just kind of okay. Out of the gate, I was seeing more of the former than the latter, but with more time, I feel like we've been, you know, catching more instances of people that have like a more nuanced take on the record, and they just feel like it's you know, even close personal friends of mine who are big JPEGMAFIA fans have been kind of like, I don't know if it's his best. I wouldn't say it's like a top 3 album from him, but like there's a lot of tracks on it that I like, and there's a lot of tracks on it I'm probably going to keep going back to. And he still sort of has a certain sound and vibe that like I'm only getting from him, you know? And, you know, I will say, like, when I first heard it, like my reaction was pretty positive. I don't think it was going to probably land on like my year-end album list, but you know, I thought it was like a pretty solid project, even if there were some low moments. But you know, like a piece of gum almost. The more that I kind of like listened to it and I got to like my 6th or 7th spin, the more I kind of chewed it over, the more flavor it like kind of lost for me. And there was like a bit of a luster that drained out of it the more that I heard it. It just didn't really kind of like hold up to as many re-listens as I think a lot of his previous projects did. I don't know. I feel like I'm just gonna leave it there. Kind of surprised, or, you know, a little disappointed by these tweets, and just kind of coming away a little confused as to like what exactly he was hoping for in terms of like the reception for this record. It seems like, as I said in my review, he wanted people to hate him but love the album.